Chapter 1. The dare that changed everything. I never believed in ghosts, curses, or the supernatural until that night. It started as a stupid bet. My best friend Jason was obsessed with horror, always looking for new thrills. He'd spend hours watching creepy documentaries, reading about haunted places, and dragging me to abandoned buildings to test the vibes. I always laughed it off. Ghosts were just stories, right? But Jason wasn't satisfied with my skepticism. "If you really don't believe in ghosts," he said one evening, his voice dripping with challenge, "then prove it. Spend one night in the abandoned Blackwood Manor. Alone." I should have said no. I should have walked away. But my pride got the best of me. Blackwood Manor stood at the edge of town, a relic of the 1800s, now crumbling and forgotten. The stories about it were infamous. People who entered never came out, strange lights flickered from the windows at night, and most terrifying of all, there was a door inside that should never be opened. "People say it's cursed," Jason added with a smirk. "They say that door is a gateway to something evil. But you don't believe that, do you?" I laughed it off. Ghost stories. That's all they are. At least, that's what I thought. Chapter 2. The house that breathes. At 11:30 p.m., I arrived at Blackwood Manor. The full moon cast eerie shadows across the dead grass, and the wind howled through the broken windows like a warning. The house loomed before me, its jagged silhouette cutting into the night sky. I hesitated at the gate, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The wrought iron was rusted and bent, and the sign above it, Blackwood Manor, was barely legible. A shiver ran down my spine. I remembered old Mrs. Hawthorne, who used to live down the street. She had grabbed my arm whenever I walked by, her eyes wide with fear. "Stay away from that place, boy," she'd croak. "Evil things happen there." "It's just a house," I muttered to myself, stepping inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it. The air was heavy, thick with an unnatural stillness. The walls seemed to close in around me, and the silence was deafening, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. It felt like the house itself was breathing, a slow, rasping inhale and exhale. I turned on my flashlight and moved forward. Dust coated every surface, and the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper. The wooden floors groaned under my weight, as if the house was whispering to itself. Cobwebs hung like macabre decorations, swaying gently in the draft. The air smelled of mildew and something else, something metallic like old blood. And then I saw it. At the end of the main hallway stood the black wooden door. Deep scratches marred its surface, and the brass handle was rusted, as if time itself had tried to keep people from opening it. The rumors about the door rushed back to me, stories of people vanishing without a trace, of screams echoing from behind it. One story, whispered among the town's oldest residents, spoke of a ritual performed within the house, a dark pact made with something ancient and malevolent. I shook off my nerves and set up my sleeping bag in the living room. "Just one night," I muttered. "Easy." But at exactly 3 a.m., the knocking started. That's Chapter 3. The first knock. 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 It was slow, deliberate, almost polite. I froze. My flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air turned freezing cold, and a strange scent filled the room. Sulfur. Knock. 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 The sound came from the black door. I tried to rationalize it. "Old pipes," I whispered. "The wind. Just my imagination." But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The knocking had a rhythm, a deliberate pattern that no natural phenomenon could replicate. Then the doorknob twisted. I stumbled backward, heart pounding against my ribs. The door didn't open, but something was trying. I could see the handle slowly turning, the rusted metal groaning in protest. Then, a whisper. Low. Unintelligible. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, slithering into my ears like a serpent. "Open it." The voice was raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. I ran. Chapter 4. Jason's fate. The next morning, Jason was gone. When I called his phone, It went straight to voicemail. I searched everywhere, his house, our favorite spots, even asked his family. No one had seen him since the night before. 2 days later, his mother reported him missing. I knew. I knew where he was. The image of the doorknob turning, the chilling whisper, the sulfur smell. It all pointed to Blackwood Manor. Jason had dared me to spend the night there, but had also been researching the house for months. He dismissed it as his usual obsession, but now I wondered if he'd gone there himself, drawn by the same dark curiosity that had gripped me. But no one would believe me. They'd say I was imagining things, that grief was making me see things that weren't there. The police looked at me with suspicion, their eyes asking unspoken questions. I couldn't tell them the truth. They'd lock me up, not for Jason's disappearance, but for being insane. Chapter 5. The return to Blackwood Manor, I swore I'd never go back. But after 2 weeks of nightmares, the knocking, the whispers, Jason screaming my name, I had no choice. Sleep offered no escape. The terror followed me into my dreams, replaying the events of that night over and over. He'd wake up screaming, convinced that something was in the room with me. I had to go back. I had to open the door, not just for Jason, but for myself. I needed to know what was on the other side, even if it meant facing my own fears. Armed with a crowbar and a flashlight, I returned to the house at midnight. It looked worse than before, as if it had decayed further in my absence. The windows were darker, the air heavier, and the silence more oppressive. The feeling of being watched was almost unbearable. The black door was still there. At 3 a.m., it knocked. This time, the knocking was louder, more insistent, almost mocking. I gripped the crowbar, my knuckles white. "Jason?" I called, my voice shaking. "Knock. Knock. Knock." I swallowed hard, the metallic taste of fear coating my tongue. I reached for the handle, and as my fingers brushed against the cold, rusted metal, a wave of dizziness washed over me. I turned it. Chapter 6. The other side, the door swung open, revealing a room that should not exist. It was endless. A black void stretched beyond what my flashlight could reach. The air smelled of decay, and the temperature dropped so low my breath formed clouds. It felt like stepping into the heart of winter, a cold that seeped into my bones and chilled my soul. Then I saw him. Jason stood in the distance, unmoving. He was further away than he should have been, given the size of the room I'd just left. It was as if the space itself was distorted, stretched, and warped in impossible ways. "Jason." I took a step inside. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me with a resounding boom that echoed through the void. Jason turned. His eyes were hollow, his skin gray. He opened his mouth, but the scream that came out was inhuman, a guttural shriek that tore through the silence. It wasn't Jason's voice. It was something else, something ancient and malevolent that had taken possession of him. The darkness moved. Something huge stirred in the void, shifting, crawling toward us. I couldn't make out its shape, but I could feel its presence, a weight of pure evil that pressed down on me, stealing my breath. I grabbed Jason's arm. "We'll have to go." But he just whispered, "It won't let us." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, like a puppet reciting lines. Chapter 7. Escape. But not really. The shadows lunged. A hand, black, long-fingered, wrong, reached for me. The fingers were like sharpened bones, tipped with claws that glinted in the faint light. I ran. I didn't think. I just ran, my feet pounding against the non,